Welcome. I'm Ron Baker, Director of the Canadian Small Church Ministry Center, and this is us, Canadian Small Churches in Action podcast. And we have a very special guest once again today. Now, he's just moving into his time zone where he'll be getting lunch soon. I'm moving into my time zone where I'm just starting my day. So this is kind of fun. He'll probably be a little more with it than I am, but let's give it a try and see. Okay, he's shaking his head and I'm wondering, oh boy, we're going to have fun. This ought to be good. This is my friend, and I'm going to let him introduce himself and just tell us a little bit of his ministry path, a number of those things that lead him into where he is now. So, Daniel, take it away.
Thanks, Ron. Thanks for having me on. This is pretty fun. It's always really good to connect with you. We go kind of way back, but
way back. Like I was thinking that this morning, 1990s. I was going to say,
99 is when I went to PA.
Yeah, we go back to the 1900s. Oh man, and just okay, continue on.
Now I'm feeling my age, Ron.
Oh dear. Your name was?
I am Daniel Graham, and I pastor Peterborough Free Methodist Church. And you and I connected when I pastored Prince Albert, Saskatchewan, Free Methodist Church there. And you were in Prince Albert at the time too.
I was.
We connected that way. My path has taken me from Southern Ontario to Northern Saskatchewan and back. Basically, that's been my journey. So Keswick, Newmarket is where I grew up in Ontario. If people know Ontario well, that's so small town Ontario. It's now kind of outskirts of Toronto, but back then it was small town Ontario. And then moved up to Sudbury. I went to university in Sudbury. Bachelor of Science in Computer Science. I was a computer programmer.
You're a geek. Wow.
I was, and I still carry that mantle. And that's where I met my wife when I was up in Sudbury, and I was attending university. And upon graduating, worked in computers for a couple of years, and then felt a call to become a pastor. Talked about that with Lisa. And when it was time to choose a seminary to attend, we chose Regina. So Canadian Theological Seminaries, where we went, Alliance denomination.
Yes.
So I grew a fond appreciation of the Alliance denomination that way. My background, Free Methodist. And then upon graduating, the church in Prince Albert was open. So interviewed there, got the call there, and was 17 years pastoring that church in Prince Albert. So ultimately about 20 years in Saskatchewan. Yeah. So it was a long tenure, but great, and lots of things I miss about Saskatchewan. Loved the people there in Prince Albert. Loved our church.
Oh yeah, and the Rough Riders. Okay, we won't go there.
I did. I turned into a football fan while I was in Saskatchewan because you can't help it. Peer pressure. I gave into peer pressure, Ron.
Okay.
So all of those things were fun and great, and we really had a very enjoyable time pastoring there, and a lot of great colleagues. So you and I have fun together, but we have lots of other colleagues from that era too, co-pastors with us in other churches who we really appreciated. Our ministerial was fantastic to be connecting with. So yeah, so that was that. The church I grew up in was a small church in around Keswick, and the churches I pastored are small churches. Even here in Peterborough, at about 140 people, it's borderline still a small church. So that's my background.
Wow. We could go on and on about stories about each other, but maybe we'll leave that for some other podcast. People can listen in and enjoy. Okay,
that's right.
Let's get back to the questions of the day. What would you find? You've worked in small churches. What are the advantages of small churches?
Lots. It's all trade-off, right? I mean, larger churches can offer some things that smaller churches can't, but smaller churches do have advantages. I think of intergenerational we have adult Bible study. We don't have mums and tots study, men's group, seniors group, all the different menu options. We have one, or in a smaller church, that's what you tend to be able to do. And therefore, you have people with all kinds of different backgrounds and all kinds of different stages of life looking at scripture together, interpreting scripture together, and enlightening one another. And I think we can learn lots from each other. The church I grew up in Keswick, when I was a teen, they wanted to take us to Canada's Wonderland. That's a big amusement park here in Toronto area. You know it?
Oh yeah, I know it. Yeah, it's beautiful.
Saskatchewan people didn't tend to know what Canada's Wonderland was when I first moved out there. Anyway,
Yeah.
So we went there, and we needed chaperones from the church, adult chaperones, and we didn't have enough. So 75-year-old Beth said, okay, I'll take. And so she came with us, and she even rode one of the roller coasters with us.
Oh my goodness.
Now, what did I learn as a teenager? I learned that whoever you are at whatever age, you do what it takes to serve your church family, right?
Yeah.
I didn't learn that in a Bible study. I learned that because that's what Beth did, right? So those kinds of intergenerational things I think are profound. I think there's personal context. So if we're talking pastor and church, I think the larger the church gets, the kind of more administrative tasks and responsibilities there are to do, and that begins to consume your time. In a smaller church, not that there isn't that stuff, but you do have a little bit more freedom to have one-on-one conversations, relationships, even friendships. One of the guys in our Saskatchewan church said, I want a pastor, but I don't want just a pastor. I want a pastor who's a friend. Well, so that's a high ask. Let me see
that is a very high ask. Yeah.
You can't, a pastor can't be best friends with everybody. I acknowledge that, right? But there was a good 5 or 6 different people that I was able to go for coffee with on a regular basis, and hopefully minister into their life and they into mine. But that personal connection, even in pastoring, I think is pretty doable in a small church, where it would be harder in a larger one. But I think that probably the biggest advantage is something like allowing people to test their giftedness.
Yeah.
So partially out of need, right?
Yeah, it does help if people are helping. Yes.
To be legal, we need 4 board members, right? And we've only got 3. Hey, will you do it? No, not that crass, but I think need does drive a little bit of asking and inviting people to go outside their comfort zone just a little bit. And I'm getting more used to that as a pastor, asking people to do this much outside their comfort zone, right? Not that much, because you're going to freak them out. They're not going to want to do it. And, I can't do that, right? But if you ask that much more, it's stretching, it's growing. It will help them see God work in their service to allow them to do things they never thought they could or were afraid to do, but they see how God allows them to do it. And I think in a small church, there's opportunities for younger people to preach. There's opportunities for people who are not musical professionals to be on stage to lead their congregation in worship, and that's a blessing too, or to lead a younger group of teens or something like that. So in those ways, inspiring and spurring on personal giftedness, I think, is an advantage.
Yeah. I'm currently an interim pastor of a small church, and we're asking a 3rd-year college student in a week or so to come and preach. He'll be good. I know him, but nevertheless, he hasn't got 40 years behind him. So it's going to be interesting, and I'm going to love it. It'll be great.
Well, and you know what? He needs that, right?
Yeah.
when we were in Bible college or seminary and we were needing to preach our first sermons in places, I remember one of my tasks in seminary, I had to call some churches and ask if I could preach there.
Oh, yeah, good.
And
how many said yes?
I got 100% hit rate, although one, he had me preach on a Wednesday night instead of a Sunday morning.
Oh, okay, he was being cautious. I understand that.
He was being measured. So we do need practice, and that a larger church isn't going to necessarily have that same kind of opportunity. They'll do things in different ways. Yes, absolutely. But that kind of sense of being part of the whole life of the church and growing in your giftedness is pretty possible in a small church.
Yeah.
You're not going to be there very long without being asked to do something, right? So you're going to be involved in the life of the church pretty quick.
Okay, now I'm going to talk about small churches, but I want to talk about regional differences. Like Saskatchewan may be slightly different than Ontario. Have you seen that regional differences affect how a small church works?
So yeah, my experience is somewhat limited. Of course, it's in Canada. It's small town Saskatchewan or small town Ontario, right? I mean, that's sort of my experience. So it's not broad, but certainly Saskatchewan has really a pioneering mentality. It's got a we'll try lots of stuff, and take it easy. It was successful or wasn't successful. Okay. So we could try the next thing. In Ontario, I would say there's a little bit more pressure of results. And I think that leads to a little bit more busyness, pressure to be always busy. So if you tried idea one and it didn't draw the kind of attendance that you wanted, then you also do idea 2 and 3. Right? So it multiplies the busyness and activity on the church calendar such that maybe suddenly you don't really have all that much relaxed time for the interpersonal stuff. I think that's regional. I had a pretty strong sense of that was fairly standard across Saskatchewan and maybe even sort of small town Alberta, Manitoba region. But Ontario has a little bit more of a that we've been here a bit longer and there's that more pressure to results. I think that's part of the bigger one. When I knew this question was coming, the bigger thought though is more urban versus rural.
Oh yeah.
And I think that's the real game changer. So I think small churches, even in rural places, have to realize they're dealing with big population issues too. You're not going to be immune from LGBTQ conversations. You're going to have to know how to do conflict resolution, those kinds of things. But urban transients, population stuff, especially racial equity things in an urban center are going to be, I think that much more prevalent. So I think the bigger divide is urban rural. I remember in Prince Albert, so Saskatoon's like an hour and a half away from Prince Albert, right?
Yeah.
Well, with the new twin highway, it's a little bit shorter than an hour and a half. But anyway,
okay, I've got a car too. Yeah, some days it just gets away on you. Yeah, it's just weird.
It's somewhere in there though.
Yeah, somewhere in there. Okay.
So I knew our Saskatoon churches and pastors pretty good, and we had good relationship. We had people move to Prince Albert from Saskatoon and try our church. Our very large Saskatoon church and our smaller Prince Albert church, very different cultures, same denomination, right? Mm-hmm. We believe the same core things. Our manual is the same. Statements of faith are the same. Our communion liturgy is this, like all that's the same denomination.
Yeah.
but very different churches.
Mhm.
You walk into the one and your experience is going to be very different than the other. And that's because of church size, partially because of urban versus rural mentality too. So.
And that even comes to the question here, working with Canadian small church ministry centers. It is difficult to say, oh, well, here's 5 things for small churches, because the context is different. And in Kindersley, interestingly enough, the interim church that I'm in this past Sunday probably had a third to half of the church as Filipino. Now,
Yeah.
this is back in Saskatchewan farmland, right? It's different than it was even 10 years ago. But if I go to another church just close by, it will be all white. And other church, so context just makes a huge difference in how you deal with it.
Yeah, absolutely right. And it can depend so much on who moves to your small town and then who moves out of your small town. So our church in Prince Albert was we had a sudden spike in diversity, ethnic diversity, when a whole family from Liberia, a refugee family, was moved to Prince Albert. They had Methodist background in their African roots. Well, we're the closest thing, Free Methodist Church, right? So they landed in our church. We were so pleased to have them. They enjoyed their time with us. It was like 12. So out of a church of 60, all of a sudden 12 are Liberian Africans. So it was cool to get to know them. But then eventually they moved down to Southern Ontario to be closer to other friends. So they were there and then gone, and so you're sort of dependent on who comes to town and who leaves town as to some of the issues that you deal with.
Well, one of the other issues that's very current for small churches and large churches is COVID. How have you survived, and others around you? What are the stories that you can hear? Or do you want to not talk about that? You're still trying to get over
still traumatized, Ron. No, I mean, when you talk to pastors, and when I talk to denominational leaders who talk to lots of pastors, it's often the same thing across the board. So it helps me not feel too sorry for myself that way. But there is truth to it that, pastors are tired. Pastors have been dealing with a lot of extra things that are not directly related to their first priority of ministry. And it's felt like distraction to some degree, and steep learning curves on things never thought I'd have to learn. I'll get to that in a second. I think the first and biggest thing, though, is watching and seeing how Christians deal with one another in extreme divergent opinion, right? Interesting. In the book of Philippians, the Apostle Paul calls that church saints. And several times in the book of Philippians, he talks about how they need to get along, but he still yet calls them saints, right? So how do we have a high opinion of one another while we still disagree on some things that need to be implemented, right? And it saddens me when I hear a Christian person talk about another one on the opposing view and say, well, they think that way because they have weak faith. It's those kinds of comments that I think have not been helpful through COVID. So I think that's probably the biggest thing, is how have we walked through divergent opinion on the rules and policies and procedures that government hands to us, and obedience or non-obedience to them? How do we walk through all that and still respect and love other Christians with other opinions? So that's a piece of it.
Well, it was interesting. I was talking with my daughter yesterday, and we were talking over various differences in our society. And I said, what we need is to get back to an etiquette of dissension.
Yeah.
How do we deal with each other? How do we live with each other? What's the etiquette? And right now, the etiquette is slice and dice the person that you're talking to, and that's not a good etiquette.
And unfortunately, my one denominational colleague made this observation that the longer the lockdowns go on, and in Ontario we're in lockdown for more and more weeks. This is the longer it goes on, the more divergent the opinions become. The harder it is to maintain that middle of, oh yeah, we'll just weather this and then get through it. That's a harder position to defend anymore. And you're getting more extreme in your setness of how we respond. But that's been part of the pressure I've felt, and other pastors and boards and church leaders have felt, is we now have to learn how to navigate government procedure, protocol, mandates, not knowing what's going to send me to jail, what's going to get my church sued. And if I don't follow something, is somebody going to die, right? I mean, there's the thing. Here's the protocols to follow. And if you don't, somebody could die because of COVID. It's like, whoa, like no pressure.
No pressure at all. No.
So you're navigating all these things. And because of the extremeness of what's at stake, that are having to learn how to do online services, like overnight, right? We went from, hey, we're in church this Sunday to we're not in church next Sunday. So what are we going to do? And this has been, I think, a great challenge, especially for smaller churches who don't necessarily have the technology, the money to buy the technology, or even the people to run the technology if they did have it, right? So you have a lot of small church pastors who themselves are doing the preaching, leading the worship, recording it all, editing it together, and then posting it up on whatever. Social media, right? Like that's a lot of extra pressures, because in the background they have to be building protocols of what it looks like to be open or not open. So yeah, so I'm not telling you anything you don't know or aware of, but
I've been watching that. So that leads to the next question, which is really, how do you keep I'll call it a godly attitude, a positive attitude? How do you do that as a pastor? Okay, I see big smile.
As soon as you figure it out, let me know, Ron.
Okay, I'll do that. I was hoping you would have the answer, and I'm going to make a lot of money off this,
Oh, yeah. I keep going back to call. This is something that our seminary did well, is to help us remember to keep thinking back to your calling. You're called or you're not. And you don't just get to give up midstream, I think is how I think of it. And then I also have to think about, well, other people are going through this too. It's not, poor Pastor Daniel in Peterborough is having to deal with difficulty because of COVID. So we have to remember we're in it together with
we're in it together.
But the calling thing is important across the board, whether it's COVID or any other issue, right? Whether it's we don't have enough money for this, or whether it's the furnace is broken, we don't know what to do, or whether it's we don't have enough people to be on the board, or we don't have enough people to run the youth this year. What are we going to do? Why am I even doing this? I could be somewhere else. I could go and be a pastor in Hawaii or something like that, right? Why am I in it? Why am I here? And I think you have to keep remembering that you're called. And that's not just pastors, right, Ron? That's, leaders in our church, the ones who keep doing and am I seeing success? they have to remember that too. We're all called. And the other thing too, I think, is we have to think the best of other people.
Mm.
So, in a small church, it'd be really easy to get offended by some of the things that people say, and even directly to you.
Yeah, exactly.
Things that you hear that people say behind the scenes too, and all of that. Sometimes people just have a bad day and aren't quite themselves and say something they didn't quite mean. You have to give leeway for that. You have to not be insulted by a lot of things. You have to remember there's a long game here. You're building the kingdom of God. So you have to remember, I think, that there are people trying to pour themselves into the life and success of the church too. And I like the phrase, give the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah.
A friend of mine says, assume positive intent. That might be a friendlier way to say it, but that sort of thing I think is necessary. So calling, remember your calling. You're called to the thing, but also so are others, and respect them and what they're doing too.
Mm-hmm. Well, if you had a piece of advice, okay, there's lots of advice I'm sure you can give.
Yeah.
I still remember back to sitting with coffee with you and other pastoral colleagues, and boy, we had a lot of good advice back then. Some of it I still agree with, so that's helpful. But okay, so if you had some good advice for someone who is considering pastoring in a small church, what would you give as your advice? Okay, another smile.
I can't limit it to one, Ron.
Okay, go for 5 or 10.
One quickly, and then a second one. So okay. The quick one is the advice a lot of people gave me was love the people.
Love the people. Yeah.
So, and I think in a smaller church, it's really important. You have to love the people, quirks and giftedness and sometimes shyness to express their giftedness, all those things, mm-hmm. all that they come with. You're a lot more involved in sort of the everyday aspects of life with people. So you're going to see the good and then some of the bad, and love the people and serve them out of that attitude. So that was advice given to me, and I try and follow that to the best that I can and check myself on that. But overall, I think a small church pastor needs to think about how they define success. Church envy is a huge issue for smaller churches. It's easy to look at other church signs and say, well, they're running this event. We should run that kind of event too, or that church is doing, whatever, right? So there's things that other churches do. And I think you have to be considering and discerning what is the giftedness and call of our church and the people in it, my ministry, and what does that look like? And, what's success going to be? Because if you're going to reach for pie in the sky, then you're going to be dissatisfied. And if you're dissatisfied ministering to a small church, the whole church will know that you're not invested. They'll see right through that. So that's what I'd say. Try and think about what success is.
Okay. Okay. So I have a lot more questions, but basically our time's up. I can't believe it.
This has gone really fast, Ron.
Yeah, I know. I wish we were able to sit down and have coffee again. And it's a little ways to go, and they're not letting me go. So thank you for being here today and just joining us. And yeah, I have really appreciated this very much, Daniel. And the very best to you and your family and to your church as well. May God bless them immensely. And,
well, thanks. Thanks so much, Ron. And really, sincerely, thanks for investing in me. You're one of those mentors to me in Prince Albert. You were a great support and encourager, and a great teacher of lots of different practical lessons. So thank you for your example and your ministry into my life too.
Well, thank you. You weren't that hard to live with. It was all right.
Well, ask my kids.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you again. We may have to do this again.
Okay. God bless, Ron. Thanks.
Same with you. Bye.